Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is David Robinson. I am the Director of Membership and Meetings at the Linguistic Society of America, the sponsor of this webinar. We're going to wait just a few more minutes to allow latecomers to get logged in, and then we'll go ahead and start. So please sit tight, and we'll be with you again in a couple of minutes. Thanks. Okay, welcome again, everybody. I think perhaps everybody's logged in now. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is David Robinson. I am the Director of Membership and Meetings of the Linguistic Society of America, which is the sponsor of this webinar. While I'm talking here for the first few minutes, you'll see a brief slideshow about the LSA and what we do. And on the last of the slides, you'll see some information about a special membership discount we have for participants in this webinar. So I'd like to take a few minutes right at the beginning to let you know how the webinar is going to go and to make sure that you're familiar with the basics of the GoToWebinar control panel. So you should see a handout widget on your control panel. And I have copies in there of the introductory slideshow, as well as the slideshow that I'm going to use to take you through abstract submission and design and review. So you can download that at any time during the webinar, and don't worry if you forget to download it, because I'll have copies available on the LSA website as well, and that'll be available either later today or by Monday. Also, you may have noticed that your microphones are muted. This is so that we don't get miscellaneous background noise, dogs barking, traffic, and so forth from all of the participants. So we will have a question and answer portion of the webinar, and when the time comes for that, you can use the questions widget on your control panel. And if your question is for a specific panelist, please let us know which one. So when you ask your questions, I'll read them out and the panelists will go ahead and answer them. And then as far as how the remainder of the webinar will go, I will take you through all the basic steps of preparing your abstract, submitting it through the LSA website, and then some notes about what happens next. A special thing that we have called the 5-Minute Linguist, and some resources that we have on the LSA website for preparing your abstract. And after I've discussed all these elements in detail, I will share my screens and just take you through submitting a sample abstract. After that, our panelists, we've got 5 panelists, and they are all members of the LSA Program Committee, which is the committee that decides on the scholarly content for the meeting. They'll discuss some of the questions that you've submitted, and finally, the last part of the webinar will be the live question and answer session. So let me get the other slideshow running, and we will get started. Okay, so this is the webinar on submitting an abstract for the LSA annual meeting. And you see up there the slide for our next annual meeting. I think you probably all know that will be in New Orleans, Louisiana at the Hilton New Orleans Riverside from January 2nd to 5th of 2020. Here's what we're going to cover in this webinar. First of all, preparing your abstract, and that will include elements of designing your abstract and things like limits. Elements of the abstract, which will include all the different things that you have to provide when you submit your abstract. I'll take you through what happens after you've submitted your abstract, and then introduce you to some of the resources for preparing your abstract. Need to run this as a slideshow. Here we go. Okay, so the first thing that you need to, I'll just run down here. This is a quick run through of what we'll go through. When you're preparing your abstract, there are word limits you need to keep in mind. There are page limits, page length limits you need to keep in mind. You need to be careful to anonymize your abstract, and that is because abstracts here are reviewed double blindly. That means you do not know who is reviewing your abstract, and whoever reviews your abstract does not know who you are. I'll go through saving your abstract as a PDF, and finally submitting it through the LSA website. Then we're going to go through the different elements of the abstract, and those include the title, the language and language family, the submission type, and that means paper or poster, the linguistic subfields that your abstract deals with, some checkboxes that we ask you to check or uncheck, the abstract length, uploading your abstract, a special abstract summary, that's a 100-word summary, abstract declarations, this is where you agree that your abstract conforms to our specifications, and then finally the authors. And then the last part will be a discussion of the 5-Minute Linguist, which is a contest that we have, and abstract submission for that is done in the same way as abstracts for papers and posters. How you can expect to be notified about what happened to your abstract. And then finally, if your abstract was accepted, how to prepare for the annual meeting. And again, as I mentioned earlier, several resources we have to help you get ready. All right, so let's go ahead and start. So first of all, there is a word limit for your abstract. It is 500 words. and gone through the basics here. There are certain things that count towards the 500-word limit and certain things that do not count. So again, you'll see here titles, examples, trees, tables, figures, captions, and separate references don't count towards the 500-word limit. So you can have 500 words plus those. However, things like inline citations and examples within the text do count towards the 500-word limit. And finally, the title of the abstract should appear at the top of the page, but does not count as part of the 500-word limit. So, and it's important to adhere to the word limits and to all the other limits I'm going to talk about, because if your abstract exceeds these limits or does not conform in some other way, you risk just having it not even reviewed at all because it doesn't conform to our abstract specifications. And so that's the word limits. However, I would say almost even a more important limit is the page limit. So you are allowed one 8.5 by 11 page. You obviously want to get as much onto it as you can, but your font cannot be too small and your margins cannot be too narrow. So there's a limit on the margins, a maximum of a 1/2 inch, and the font can be no smaller than 10 point. And the main thing to stress is that everything, and this includes the abstract itself, examples, trees, tables, figures, captions, references, it has to fit on one page. This is one of the things that will get your abstract rejected immediately, is if someone looks at your abstract and it's more than one page. It's quite obvious that it has exceeded the limits. So again, you are welcome to, to have the body of the abstract. You are welcome to use, to have trees, tables, figures, and to have separate references. But whatever you do, everything has to fit on one page. So I would say this is really probably the primary limit. And again, you do want to adhere to the 500-word word limit as well. And then it's also very important when you're preparing your abstract to anonymize it. This means that you should not be identifiable in any way when someone is reading at the abstract. This is also something that can get your abstract disqualified. So first of all, don't list yourself at the top of the page as the author. So I just used a sample title here, The Phonology of Athabascan by J. Smith. So you don't want to say by your name. And we have seen abstracts that do this, so please don't do that. Don't refer to yourself by name in the abstract. So don't say, in Smith 2014, I state. Don't provide any other information that might reasonably cause viewers to be able to identify you. And then finally, when you name the file for your abstract, don't use your name in it. So it would be safer to say something like Athabascan Phonology LSA 2020. You can use the title, but again, you don't want to identify yourself by name. And again, this is because abstracts are reviewed by people who should not know who you are. Right? And then finally, you're welcome to compose your abstract in whatever, however you like, but it should be submitted in a PDF format. So once you have got your abstract ready, you want to print or save it to PDF. And when you do that, again, as we just said, you do not want to include your name in the name of your file. So it should not be Smith LSA 2020 PDF. It should be Athabascan Phonology or some other title, just not including your name. Also check to make sure that when you've saved your abstract to PDF, it hasn't expanded to 2 pages. I've seen this happen before. So just double check that, and if it has somehow become 2 pages, go back and shorten it so that the PDF file is only 1 page. And then finally, and this last step is something that I will run through when I'm sharing my screen later on as well. You may need to remove author information from the PDF. You'll do this by opening the PDF, clicking on File and Properties, and then checking the author field. And if there is any identifying information in there, you can remove it and resave your abstract. And if you're not able to remove the author information, contact me at drobinson@lsadc.org. And again, you'll see this email address several times throughout this presentation. So I'm the go-to person for problems with abstract submissions. So if at any point you have any difficulty that's not addressed here or any other questions that aren't addressed here about submitting an abstract, feel free to email me at this address, and I will help you with that. And so you've got your abstract ready. A couple of other things you want to keep in mind. So abstracts are submitted through the LSA website. This means that at least the submitting author of the abstract must be an LSA member. The submitting author does not need to be the lead author of the abstract, but again, at least the submitting author of the abstract has to be a member. If there's more than one author, only the submitting author needs to be a member. Also, you may submit only one single authored abstract, but you can submit any number of multi-authored ones. Again, if you submit more than one single authored abstract, that could get both of them disqualified. And finally, we have 7 different sister societies that meet with us. Some of you may know this, some of you may not. They are the American Dialect Society, the American Name Society, the Society for Pidgin and Creole Linguistics, the North American Association for the History of the Language Sciences, and several others. They also solicit abstracts around the same time. You may not submit identical abstracts to the LSA and to one or more of those meetings. If you do, when you get found out, again, they'll both be removed from consideration. Okay, so when you go to the LSA website and you submit your abstract, these are just the steps that you will need to go through, and I'll just run you through them one at a time. The first thing you need to enter is the title. So there's a text box at the very top of the page where you will indicate that. And if there are diacritics in your title, you can just cut and paste the text to insert those. And again, just a reminder here that on your PDF abstract that you're going to upload to the website, your title should appear at the top of that. Okay, next we have, you'll see that there is a field for language and one for language families. And we ask you to fill those out because they help us to match your abstract with reviewers who have expertise in the language or languages that your abstract deals with. And you can indicate one language and language family or more than one. So again, those are good to fill out. Okay, after that, we ask you what type of submission you'd like to have your abstract considered for. And there are 2 types. There are posters and there are 20-minute papers. Just for some context, in the annual meeting, we have 3 sessions, they're plenary sessions of 75 posters each. They're on Thursday evening, Friday morning, and Saturday morning. So the total number of posters is 225. And these are plenary poster sessions, meaning that nothing else is going on at the meeting during that time, so everybody can come to the session where the posters are being held and wander among them and see everything at one time. Then we have 20-minute papers. We have a total of 168 of those, and they are they're presented on Thursday afternoons, Friday and Saturday mornings, and afternoons, and Sunday morning. And there are 6 concurrent paper sessions running at any one time. And depending on the time of day, the sessions might be 3 papers long, 6 papers long, or 7 papers long. And each paper is going to run 20 minutes, and each paper will have 10 minutes of question and answer. And then a couple of things to consider when you are putting down your abstract type. You must list a first choice for your abstract type, and that can be, obviously, paper or poster. You may list a second choice, but having a second choice is optional. And I may be stating the obvious here, but if you have listed only a first choice, that is the only format that your abstract will be considered for. If you list a second choice, your abstract will be considered for both formats, and it's quite possible that it may be accepted in your second choice of format. This is especially likely if you listed paper as your first choice and poster as your second choice, simply because there are more spaces available for posters than there are for paper. So do not be surprised if you've listed first choice paper, second choice poster. If you get an acceptance notification and we say, congratulations, your abstract has been accepted as a poster. That is a possibility. Then we ask you to list primary and secondary linguistic fields. You'll have a drop-down menu of about a dozen choices. I'll show you those when I do the screen sharing later on. And again, we ask you to fill these out because they help to match your abstract with reviewers who are going to have the expertise to evaluate it. And again, I would say if there is truly no secondary subfield, if you feel your abstract is strictly phonetics and nothing else, then you can have identical primary and secondary fields. But we encourage you as much as possible to differentiate. We get many hundreds of abstracts, and this helps us, again, match them with reviewers as accurately as we can. Then you'll see a few checkboxes on the abstract submission form. We ask you to check these if your abstract concerns an endangered language. There is a pre-checked checkbox, which asks if you want your abstract to be considered for a poster or 20-minute paper. So assuming you want to submit your abstract for a poster or a 20-minute paper, you do leave that pre-checked. If you want your abstract to be considered for the 5-Minute Linguist, you should also check that checkbox. And I'll talk a little bit separately about the 5-Minute Linguist. Then there is just a field where you enter the length of your abstract. So again, this is a good chance for you to double check the length of your abstract and make sure it doesn't exceed the word limit. And this asks for the length in words, not the page length. Then you will be asked to upload your abstract. That's pretty straightforward, and again, you'll see how to do this when I run through it for you. And again, just a second reminder here, the file name should not include your name. And then finally, every once in a while, someone does have a little difficulty uploading your abstract. If that happens, again, feel free to email me. Okay, the next element that you'll see is we have a text box for you to enter a 100-word version of your abstract. This short abstract is what will be used if your abstract is accepted for the annual meeting handbook. The handbook lists short abstracts for every paper and poster that is presented at the meeting. So it's possible, as a lot of linguistics abstracts or your abstract may contain special characters, diacritics, different formatting. If that's the case, we ask you to also upload a PDF copy of the 100-word abstract. That's just to make sure that we can show your abstract accurately in the handbook. The PDF is optional, but we encourage you to do it again if you have any special characters, diacritics, or things like that. If you don't have, if it's just straightforward text, you don't need to submit a PDF copy. And then also, if you submit, if you're submitting your abstract for the 5-Minute Linguist contest, you do want to include a 300-word version of your abstract in the box provided. And I'll talk a little more about this later, but you do want to keep a few special things in mind when you're preparing an abstract for the 5-Minute Linguist. Then we have some declarations. You have to check these. If you don't check all these checkboxes, you won't be able to submit your abstract. And again, it's just a good way for you to make sure that you've conformed in all the ways that you need to the abstract specifications. You just want to make sure, again, that your abstract is no more than 500 words long and that it's no more than 1 page long. Do make sure that you've also anonymized it sufficiently. Your name doesn't appear anywhere. You don't refer to yourself by name and the pronoun I, and that your PDF is anonymized. You also want to, it's a good time to check that you haven't submitted more than 1 single authored abstract. And then we also ask you to affirm that your research has not been published or will not be published before the annual meeting. And then finally, the last part of submitting the abstract is the author or authors. So this is where you enter the author names and affiliations. Since I'm assuming you are going to be the person submitting the abstract, your name and affiliation will be pre-populated because you will be submitting the abstract after you've logged in to the LSA website. But you are free to rearrange the authors in the order in which they should appear, so that if you're not the lead author, you can put the lead author's name in first and then insert your name and affiliation where they should belong. As you're going through and entering your authors, if an author is a member of the LSA, their name and affiliation will pre-populate after you've entered a few letters. If they aren't an LSA member, that's fine. Nothing should pre-populate, and you can enter their name and affiliation manually. Also, there is space for up to 6 authors on the form. Occasionally, there is an abstract with more authors than that. If there are more than 6 authors, and if your abstract is accepted, again, contact me at the email address there, drobinson@lsadc.org, and I will make sure that all the all the authors and affiliations appear in the correct order in the online and handbook versions of the abstract. Then, so you've made sure your abstract conforms to all our specifications. You've got all the elements ready for it. So again, as I said, you will need to log into the LSA website to submit your abstract. So that is the first thing you do. Then you can either navigate to the 2020 annual meeting page, or once you've logged in, you should see the green Submit Abstract button. So you will click on that. You will enter all the requested information, and that is the information that we have just discussed. Once you've done all that, click the Submit button at the bottom of the page to submit your abstract. And again, if you get an error message or you have any problems while you're doing this, contact me at drobinson@lsadc.org. By now, you are getting the impression I'm the go-to guy for questions about abstract submission, and that is quite accurate. So I've talked a little bit about the 5-Minute Linguist here and there. For those of you who don't know about this, we started this, I think, in probably our 2016 meeting in Washington, D.C., and we've been doing it ever since. It is it's a contest. It happens on Friday evenings, and there are 10 to 12 entertaining, accessible, and above all, brief presentations by finalists who are selected, and they're done in front of a live audience. It is a plenary event, again, so nothing else is going on during that time. And it has become increasingly popular over the years, so that now it gets quite a good audience, and people get very excited about it. So abstract submission for the 5-Minute Linguist is done in the same way. If you're submitting an abstract for a paper poster, and you also wanted to be considered for the 5-Minute Linguist, you follow all the steps that we have just been discussing. And you will also include that separate 300-word abstract that I mentioned. And again, just bear in mind when you're writing this 300-word abstract for the 5-Minute Linguist that the presentations should be entertaining, accessible to a generalist audience, and especially short. So again, keep all that in mind. And then be sure to check the checkbox to have your abstract considered for the 5-Minute Linguist. If you want to submit an abstract only for the 5-Minute Linguist, you will need to go through all the steps above, and this may mean including sort of a dummy entry for abstract upload. Since the only thing we really need, if your abstract is being considered only for the 5-Minute Linguist, all we need is the 300-word abstract. So you could upload you'll have to upload something for abstract upload, but it could be just a dummy PDF, or it could be a PDF of your 300-word 5-Minute Linguist abstract. Fill out all the other information. Make sure that the checkbox to have your abstract considered for the 5-Minute Linguist is checked, and make sure that the box to have your abstract considered for a paper or poster is unchecked. Okay, so you've submitted your abstract. What happens next? So a couple of things right away. You should receive an automated acknowledgement right away that your abstract was submitted. So if you don't receive that, check your spam or junk folder. And occasionally there are firewalls, especially universities, that the notification doesn't get through to you at all. If you don't seek an acknowledgement, contact me at drobinson@lsadc.org, and I can confirm that we received the abstract. Also, once you have submitted it, you should be able to, when you're logged in to the LSA website, you should see a My Abstracts tab below your name, and if you click on that, you should be able to see a list of the abstract you should be able to see the abstract you just submitted, and any other abstracts that you've submitted for previous annual meetings. So after you have submitted your abstract will be reviewed by at least 3 reviewers. And reviewers are going to be PhD linguists. They may include members of the LSA's program committee. And because we get so many abstracts, we had over 800 last year for the meeting in New York City. We need several hundred external reviewers to help us review abstracts, so they may also review. Every abstract is also overseen by the program committee chairs, so that there are several layers of oversight for this. It's also, we ask reviewers to leave constructive comments for abstract submitters, so whether your abstract is accepted or rejected, once that you've had a notification, you will be able to see any comments that reviewers left for you. You will be formally notified of the program committee's decision late during the week of August 19th. Just in case the notification doesn't get through, I'm going to let you know when notifications are being sent out, so that if you didn't get one, you can contact me and I can tell you what the decision was. So when you get the letter of notification, and if your abstract was accepted, you will be notified of the date and time that your abstract has been assigned to, and also on the format. So again, you may have submitted your abstract with a first choice of paper and a second choice of poster, but you may have been accepted as a poster, and the notification letter will tell you that. And you'll be asked to let me know no later than the end of August if you will need to withdraw your abstract. And again, you can do that just by emailing me. Then there are several resources for preparing your abstract and getting things ready for the annual meeting if it was accepted. So the first one I put up at the top is the call for abstracts. You can see that on our 2020 annual meeting page, and it contains links to, I think, everything else that is on here. So that's a good general resource, call for abstracts. It's a little different for each meeting, but the 2020 annual meeting page has the current call for abstracts on it. We have a webinar. It was done last year with are then with the senior co-chair of the program committee, Khalil Iskaris of the University of Southern California. Abstract writing, how to convince in a page. That's on our YouTube channel. The link is there, or you can just Google it. We also have some model sample abstracts. Those include some that were accepted and that we have used as models with the permission of the people who wrote them. And I believe there's also in there a sort of a negative example that we made up. This is how not to write an abstract. And then finally, depending on how your abstract was accepted, whether it was accepted as a paper or a poster, we have some guidelines for presenting those. So if your abstract was accepted, so we're going to see you in New Orleans, January 2nd through the 5th. A couple of things you'll want to keep in mind. Make your travel plans. Do that in plenty of time to get a good fare. You will want to reserve a room. We encourage you to do that at the Hilton New Orleans Riverside. We are able to negotiate really good rates for our attendees. And particularly if you're a student, we get a rate so that you can go 2, 3, or 4 to a room. That makes it cheaper. It's important if you're staying at the conference hotel that you register online using the link that we'll provide, or that if you're registering by phone, you mention the Linguistic Society of America conference, just so you get the correct rate. Otherwise, you risk paying more. And that registration is going to be available September 1st. Also, you want to register for the LSA annual meeting. That will be on the LSA website. We'll have a link for that. That will also be available September 1st. And again, we try to keep that as inexpensive as possible for students. It is under $80 for students. We also, if you are a student, we have a volunteer space for roughly 50 volunteers, where we ask you to exchange 8 hours of time at the annual meeting in exchange for complimentary registration. So we'll get information out about that to you as well. And assuming that this may be your first time submitting an abstract for the annual meeting or attending, we encourage you to go ahead and attend the LSA for first-timers. That's an orientation that we have. It's probably going to be at about 3:30. It's on January 2nd, the Thursday of the meeting. And so we'll see you there on January 2nd through the 5th. So that concludes the slideshow part of my presentation. And now I just wanted to run you through what it looks like to submit an abstract. And after that, we'll go on to the panel discussion. So this is actually my cat, Edward Pascucci. So he has logged into the LSA website, and he's going to submit his abstract. So here's the big green button we talked about. Oops. I should have checked that before. Okay. Okay, so here we are. So you do want to go to the 2020 annual meeting page. So I'm going to put in my title first. I'm not going to call it E. Pascucci Athabaskan. I'm not going to put my name in it, so the name is going to come out. Here's where you choose your options. And you'll see you can type the first few letters in and something will come up. I'm not a linguist, so I can't name an Athabaskan language. So I'm just going to put English in here, but you see how it works. Language family, Athabaskan. Okay, so here's that. Here you can also select more than one language or more than one language family if you want. And this is if you're dealing with several languages in your abstract. You also want to select your first and second choice submission type. So my first choice is going to be a poster. My second choice is going to be a paper. My primary linguistic field, and you'll see these. We have one that's specially for the International Year of Indigenous Languages. Then we have anthropological linguistics, applied linguistics, bilingualism, computational linguistics, discourse analysis, forensic linguistics, historical linguistics, history of linguistics, language acquisition, language documentation, lexicography, linguistics and literature, mentoring and professional development, morphology, neurolinguistics, philosophy of language, phonetics, phonology, pragmatics, prosody, psycholinguistics, semantics, sociolinguistics, sociology of linguistics, syntax, teaching linguistics, text/corpus linguistics, translation, typology, and writing systems. So that's a lot to choose. Hopefully you'll find something between those. Again, the primary linguistic field is required. A secondary one is optional, but we encourage you to sorry, I take it back. The submission type, first type, is mandatory. The second choice type is optional. The linguistic fields are both mandatory. Next to that are the checkboxes. So click here if this concerns an endangered language. This checkbox here is only if you wish the abstract to be considered for the 5-Minute Linguist contest. Otherwise, leave it unchecked. And this text box, or this checkbox here, is pre-checked. And again, you just uncheck this one only if you want your abstract to be considered just for the 5-Minute Linguist. Here is where you enter your abstract length. Here is where you upload the abstract. So you're going to browse. I've got there's my, oops. So I wanted actually to go through the extra step. Let me do that now. Or to go through the extra step of turning this into a PDF, just so you can see how to anonymize your PDF. So I've written this in Word. You'll see it's not an actual abstract. It's just a document that I created in Word. But I'm going to print it to PDF. So again, I'm not going to include my name in the title. I'm going to call it something like this, LSA 2020. Okay, so this is taking quite a long time, but it looks like it is printing to PDF. Yep, here we go. Okay, this should open up automatically. Terrific. Okay, so here's my PDF that I'm going to upload, but I want to check first and make sure that it is anonymous as well. I've made sure that my abstract is anonymous. So I'm going to click File, I'm going to click Properties, and sure enough, under Author, it says David. So I'm just going to erase that, click OK, and then Save. So now I've got my abstract in PDF form, and the PDF itself is anonymous as well as the abstract being anonymous. So back here to the abstract submission interface. Now I'm going to browse. Here is my, oh, come on over. There is my abstract, and I'm going to click Upload. And there we are, so it's ready. I'm going to put in my 100-word abstract summary here. And it'll tell you how many words you have left. This part is optional. Again, this is the PDF of your abstract summary. This is what you will want to do if your abstract summary includes special characters. Otherwise, it's optional. And this is 300-word abstract for the 5-Minute Linguist is where you will put in your abstract for the 5-Minute Linguist. So this is, again, you only need to do this if your abstract is being submitted for the 5-Minute Linguist. Finally, we have the declarations. So these all have to be checked in order for you to submit your abstract. So again, this is a good reminder for you to check and make sure that your abstract conforms to all the specifications. Here is the authors. So I'm the lead author here. So I'm going to pick my affiliation from the drop-down menu. And if your affiliation doesn't appear in the drop-down menu, you know what you can do? You can email me again, drobinson@lsadc.org. So one of our panelists, Jelena Krivokapic, is my co-author. So I am going to enter her name, and here she is, because she is an LSA member. Her name and affiliation are going to repopulate. My third co-author is my other cat. So here she is, and here is, I'll just pick an affiliation for her. So here we go, and I don't have other co-authors, so I'm not going to include those. And then I'm going to go ahead and submit. You can also, there's a preview button if you want to preview your abstract, but once you're satisfied that everything is submitted, you can go ahead and submit it. Okay, I've left something out. This is what will happen if you leave something out. You'll see a couple of red things here. So the declarations field is required. So I have to check all the declarations. What else did I leave out? Must agree that all declarations are accurate. So I think I've done everything now. Okay. So you'll see a notification right here. Abstract, the title of your abstract has been created. A little thank you for your abstract submission. So I'm here in my membership profile as Pescucci, my cat, and you'll see that I have the tab that says My Abstracts. And here's where you can see your abstract. Once decisions have been made, you'll also be able to see the status here, whether it was accepted or rejected, and also what a session it has been assigned to. And this is the point also where you should get a automatic email notification. All right, so that concludes my part of the presentation. What I would like to do now is introduce you to our panelists. And they're going to turn their webcams on as I introduce them, and then they're going to spend a few minutes discussing some of the questions that you have that you've sent in. This is Jelena Krivokapic. She is from the University of Michigan. Hi, Jelena.
Hi.
And she is the junior co-chair of our program committee. And again, the program committee is a really important committee of the LSA. They are the people who determine all the scholarly content for the annual meeting. We also have with us 3 rank and file members of the program committee. They are Natasha Abner, also from the University of Michigan. Oops. Natasha, yeah, you can turn your microphone on if you need to. Also, Sandra Lainhard from the University of Texas at San Antonio.
Hello.
Jelena, you can keep your cam on if you want. Yep, there you are. And Juliet Stanton from New York University.
Hi.
Juliet, and also we have Alicia Parrish from New York University. And Alicia has a special role. She is the student member of the program committee, and it's her special brief to kind of keep an eye on the programming that we do, especially for students at the annual meeting. So the panelists are going to spend a few minutes talking about some of the questions that you submitted about abstract submission, and then we'll open it up to your general question and answer. And if you have questions, you can start asking them now using the questions widget, and we'll answer them if they were received during the question and answer period at the end. So again, thanks to all of our panelists for being here, and take it away. So we had one question which I submitted that I thought was particularly interesting, and maybe you can give us your views on this. This is, are there ways to indicate your status as an underrepresented researcher? And that could be either subfield, school location, social identity, without violating the anonymization guidelines. If not, how is the LSA ensuring equity and parity among accepted presentations, posters, and panels without that information?
So we don't actually have a way for to say something about the subfields. Otherwise, everything is. Oh, this is not very good. Sorry, there's an echo. Otherwise, all the abstracts are anonymous. So there's other than keywords and other than subfields, there's nothing else that can be indicated outside of the abstract.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say you probably could without saying who you are as part of the abstract. If, for example, you said, I'm working on African American language, which is my native language, for example, which by definition, and then, I mean, I think there are ways that you could do that. That is part of indicating subjectivities that connect to why you're doing the work that you're doing or what have you. So I think that you could do that without violating anonymity, but also providing a better context for the work that you're doing. And that would be one way.
Sorry, absolutely. I meant outside of the abstract where you have only keywords and subfields. But yes, definitely within the abstract, definitely, yes, you can do that within the abstract.
Yeah.
Okay, and any other thoughts about that? And again, I think the main point in anonymization is that the abstract should not be able to be linked to you personally. And as Sandra mentioned, there are ways to, I think, to put in, and in some ways it will be evident from the abstract itself if it's an underrepresented subfield. That will be evident from the abstract itself. But there are ways to refer to those elements of yourself without strictly indicating that it's you. Here's another question, and I'd be interested in your take on this, panelists. My research has developed such that it's now very different from the abstract I submitted. So this is for someone, this is a question I got in a previous year from someone who had submitted an abstract. It got accepted, and then they started, they hadn't done all the work by the time when they submitted the abstract, so they started working on it, and the research developed, and it developed so much that it kind of became a different piece of research than they had started with. Can they still present their paper or poster?
My take on that would be yes. I mean, this is normal. We submit the abstracts mid-June, so, and the conference is in January. So clearly you have a lot of time to do more work. You will, in whatever you have submitted, you will have progressed since then. What is probably not a good idea, both for you yourself, is that for the abstract submitter, is if you say, for example, you'll be talking about speech production. Now, meanwhile, you've conducted a speech perception experiment. You think that's really cool. Now, that I wouldn't present because people come in to hear your speech production experiment. So, and people who do speech perception might not be there to hear your abstract. So I think you're doing yourself your disservice if you present something completely different. If your conclusions are different, if your opinions have changed, that's perfectly fine. That's research. So that would be my take on that.
And
I would also say that, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say a good rule of thumb is if you were looking for a poster or a talk to go to and you read that abstract, the changes that you want to make when you actually present it, is that something that if you were going to someone else's presentation, you would still want to hear about those changes and those updates? If you expect to hear, as Yelena said, a production task, and you end up hearing about perception, you'll possibly feel misled. But if you're hearing interesting advances that came up after the research of the abstract, for me attending that kind of a talk, I'd be happy to hear about those things.
And if I'm not mistaken, there is a period in between being accepted and then the final abstracts that any updates are able to be made. Like it's a small window, but there's still a window in there. If I'm not isn't that correct?
It's not strictly true because we ask you for the short 100-word abstract when you submit the original. So that's normally what we're going to use for the as well as the title for the handbook. If I think we could consider if something like this came up, making a change in that. But under normal circumstances, once you've submitted the abstract, that again, it was an excellent rule of thumb that Alicia brought up. If the research has changed such that somebody went to hear it based on the abstract that you submitted and would feel deceived, that might be a good reason not to go ahead and present it. If they would be able to see that it went off in a slightly different direction or posed some interesting questions that weren't raised originally, fine. Also, this is a good time to mention that if there was a typo in your abstract and you realize that after you submitted it, you can get in touch with me, and you can send me a clean version, and I can upload that for you.
And see, I guess that's what I was thinking of. Like, if someone contacted you, David, and said, whatever, there's a misrepresentation or there's a slight change or whatever, I guess I was just thinking that they would just contact you. And I don't know how long that window is, but to say, I need to make these changes, and then it would be possible.
Yeah, I'll say that's normally just for typos. Ideally, when somebody submits their abstract, it's the final form, and good if there was a typo and they discovered it afterwards. That's lucky them. With 800 abstracts being submitted, it's not an opportunity for everyone to make every change they think of. In other words, so.
Yes.
We try to keep it right then strictly to the necessary. So I'm fixing a typo.
So what I wanted to add was that I thought about this last year when I was reviewing, and one of the things that I do remember making this comment on a few abstracts was it didn't seem like the work was advanced enough to be ready to present, and that maybe the following year might be a better year to submit the abstract. So if as a reviewer I'm reading it and it seems like you've got an idea, but you really haven't done a lot to sort of advance the work, then I'm more likely to give it a lower score, or if it sounds interesting and say, this really sounds great. I don't think you're going to be ready by this coming LSA, but keep working on this and get some more data, some more information, whatever it is, and I hope you submit it at a later date.
Can I just add something to the topic of typos? Now, if you have one typo, that's not going to, kill your abstract. If your abstract is riddled with typos, it just looks very careless and it's not going to go down well. Just so a general rule of thumb, proofread your abstract, do a spell check, and also give it to somebody else to read before submitting. That will save a lot of. It's always good to have a second opinion on an abstract, preferably not last minute, but earlier. But also typos. It's they're not science, but they make a very bad impression if the abstract is full of typos.
Okay, here's another question. My abstract was accepted, but it turns out I can't attend the meeting. Can somebody else present my paper or poster? And that's kind of one I can answer that one. if you have a co-author, one of your co-authors can present the paper or poster, but if you're the sole author and you can't be there, you'll have to withdraw it. We just ask that it should be one of the authors that's there to present it.
A kind of related question. I've seen at a couple of conferences people who have a poster but can't make it, so they send their poster with a friend and then hang it up but don't show up. Is that an acceptable thing to do for the LSA or not?
Well, it's a good question. So we, what we technically say is that and you will see this if you submit an abstract for a poster and if it gets accepted, your poster is going to be on such and such a date, such and such a time. You can put it up at this time and take it down at this time. It will be on poster board number such and such, and you are expected to be present from, 4 o'clock to 5:30 or whatever the time of the session is. So that's what we say in the acceptance letter in practice, and I cannot condone this officially. We don't go through every poster board to make sure that it's attended by the person who by one of the authors. So there's too few of us at the meeting and too many posters going on at any one time for us to do that. So officially, I have to say that's not allowed. But that's all I'll say. Let's see. Do any of you have any questions that maybe people at your institutions have asked you over the years about submitting an abstract?
I do have a question just to follow up on what we were just talking about, because, and I don't remember if this is at LSA or if this was at some other conference, but I was thinking about in terms of like a symposium or an organized session. Sometimes if something happened sort of last minute and someone couldn't come, but because it was an organized session and the panelists had worked together, that I've seen someone else on the panel present the paper if it had already been sort of written out or whatever.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a different animal. So for anybody who may not know, what we've talked about here are 20-minute papers and posters, and a little bit about the 5-Minute Linguist. There are also things called organized sessions at the annual meeting. They have a separate submission and review process. They are sessions. They can be like symposia or workshops or panels. They're organized around a specific theme, and they are proposed by LSA members or committees. And they're all they're set up a little bit differently. And it has happened certainly in the past that an organized session has been accepted, and then maybe one of the panelists has to drop out. They can't make it to the meeting. They get sick. Somebody else has to, and so it's not quite the same situation. And we allow in those cases for I think another panelist or another participant to present the work, or what actually happens, I think even more often than that, is that we allow for a substitution. Professor X can't come, but Professor Y is willing to come in their place and has, and here's their presentation. So there's a little bit of flexibility there that we don't have with individual paper and poster abstracts.
I have a question, if I can talk about something different.
Sure.
So for the part of the abstract submission process where you select language and language family, I'm wondering what the best practice is for abstracts that are about typological work, so that might deal with 200 or 300 languages. It seems unrealistic to kind of enter in every single language that was queried for the project, but it's not clear what the alternative is.
So I could say a few things, but Yelena, do you have any thoughts about that, or?
I think selecting, I don't have, the most important case in this case would be to select the typology as an area. That will help a lot. And then I wouldn't do we have an option other instead of a specific? Okay, no, then
yet you can't submit without selecting something in that field for the languages.
Okay, I guess that's something to work on to make that option available.
Yeah, so so I mean, I agree with what's been said. You do want to select obviously the typology subfield, and what I would suggest, I mean, I've seen abstracts submitted where the person has obviously gone to the trouble of clicking on 15 or 20 different languages and language families so that you get all that, but in a case like that, the nature of the research is going to be evident from the abstract itself, as well as from the subfield selected. So that I dare say that's probably an abstract that would get a little more individual oversight from the program committee chairs, because they're going to say, oh, here's here's a typology abstract that deals with 50 languages. Let's see who we can match that with.
Is it possible to add a field that says multiple or something like that? So that way it relieves you from having to select so many ones or addressing that.
We can look into that for sure. Yeah, we don't have it now, but it's certainly something that.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think we should work on that.
Yeah, it seems to me that both this question and the one we started with about indicating information about coming from an underrepresented group or studying language associated with an underrepresented group are both great things to put on the agenda for stuff for folks to think about.
Yep.
For the program committee and LSA to think about, I mean. Yep.
I mean, for me, thank you for not Natasha for bringing back up the original question that we started with, because for me, after just having thoroughly read the statement on race that LSA just submitted, and then sort of the call to action that's a part of that, I think one of the things that would be responsive to that would be having those sort of subjectivities or demographic identifiers along with presentations, so that even if it's not something the reviewers see, but LSA has a housekeeping of. I'm really big on this sort of sociology of linguistics. And one of those things would be LSA sort of periodically or I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word I'm just looking for. But anyway, routinely looking at who is participating in LSA, who's submitting, who's getting accepted, etc. And you can do that across a lot of different things, including things like, again, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, etc. But you could also do that in terms of looking at the fields that people are doing, subfields that they're doing, what have you, and seeing how inclusive LSA really is being in who participates, or I should say, who even chooses to submit to LSA, as well as then who then is actually being accepted to participate in LSA. And that follows for me another issue, which for me as someone who works in sociolinguistics, even though LSA has improved a great deal on this, that's always been one of the issues for people in my area, is how inclusive is LSA in terms of sociolinguistics, right? We sort of went from, in the past, when I first started as an LSA member, that I think there was only one sociolinguistic session. It was always on Sunday, and which is the day a lot of people are leaving. So, it was hit or miss in terms of who would be able to participate. It does seem that LSA has made more of an effort to get more than one sociolinguistic session, and not just on Sunday. So I think that's helpful. But I think sessions like this and also collecting that sort of data can help with that, and seeing how LSA has put its programs together in the past in ways that it can redress some of those disparities in the future.
I like these ideas, and I think they would be great things to add to the abstract submission interface, because there is a point in the process when we export all the abstracts, and when that happens, we would have instant statistics on the demographics of who submitted, who was accepted, and so that's definitely something I'll add to our list of desiderata for our programmers for this.
And certainly just as a side thing, something to connect with the recent survey of linguists that was done by Corinne, Savi, and Lena. I'm forgetting what the survey about linguist identity and experience in the field. I'm forgetting what they call it, what the official name of the project was.
Inclusivity, maybe.
Okay, so this is roughly the time that we had set up for questions from the audience. We've got one, but for any of the rest of you, if you have questions, this is a good time to answer them in the questions, to ask them in the questions widget. So I'll start reading them off in the order they have come in. And some of them, I see the first one I can answer myself, but the others may want to chime in. And then the second one is more a question for the panel. So the first question here is, are there examples of the 5-minute linguist presentations online? Is there any vetting other than the abstract, e.g. a video audition? So the short answers are yes and no. Okay, there are examples of the 5-minute linguist presentation online. I will try to send a link around to those before this webinar is finished. Today, if I don't manage to do that, I will put it up on the page for the webinar that I will send a link around to everybody after the fact, so it'll be there. We do have, video recordings of the last several 5-minute linguist contests, so we do have examples of that online.
If I'm recalling correctly, you can also like find them with they're on, I think we found them on just a YouTube search before.
They're on the YouTube, yeah, you could probably just even Google them or go to our YouTube channel and search. As far as vetting, there is no vetting other than the abstract. The vetting is a little bit different in that abstracts for regular papers and posters are reviewed by members of the program committee and external reviewers, whereas abstracts for the 5-minute linguist are reviewed by members of the public relations committee. So if your presentation is accepted, and I think it's been a total of 10 presentations, then there is a rehearsal actually at the annual meeting the night before, a rehearsal with cameras and stages and the microphone and everything. So and there's a lot of support in the run up to it. Yeah, Natasha.
Oh, sorry, and feedback. You sort of get to work with the MCs who are people that work in presenting linguistics to a general audience, like John Porter and Gretchen McCulloch, to get feedback on your presentation to perfect it for the actual performance.
Okay, great. So it really is, if you haven't been to one before, I encourage everybody to, to come to New Orleans and to attend the 5-minute linguist. It really is, it's exciting. It's different from the run-of-the-mill presentations. So here's a good question for all of you on the panel. Given limited space in the abstract, so that's 500 words for the abstract, how should one balance the need for sufficient citations with including a range of examples and actually explaining the research itself?
Oh, it's a fine line.
This is where feedback from others can be really helpful, having other people read your abstract. The kinds of questions they come up with about maybe framing or about your data can help you decide where you need more information and where you can cut things.
I think also with abstract writing, as a reviewer, I'm looking for something that is clear and that obviously makes a contribution. And including too much information about prior work or how your work relates to other people can come at the expense of actually showing what you have done and making it clear. So kind of the top priority for me when I'm writing an abstract is to make sure it comes very clearly to the front, kind of what I have done and how it is different than prior work. And then kind of whatever space is left, you can give to discussing how it's different from prior work and so on. so forth. But yeah, I agree, it's a fine line. There's not
And
like
I think, as a reviewer, I always try to give the author the benefit of the doubt that they're working with this within this constrained space. So make it clear that you're familiar with the background literature that you're basing your research on, but certainly we don't expect an exhaustive inventory of all of the previous work on the topic and, you know, a lot of details of all of the parts of the phenomena that you're investigating. But certainly make it clear that you are familiar with those things.
Yeah, and part of the reason I also say it's a fine line is because, and I struggle with this in doing abstracts, because I don't want to write everything in the abstract that I found, because then why would you come? But then I also realize that sometimes reviewers really want to see that so they can make sure that, and it's like, okay, so that's part of, for me, that's when I say that's part of the fine line, and how much data do you share in that space that you have, because people want to sort of know how far along you are, right? And what you know, is this going to be interesting? But on the other hand, if they can just read it, then why would they go to it? So yeah, that's part of the fine line, but also to what Juliet said, which is that, or indicating that you're familiar with previous research, but not getting bogged down into that, because ultimately, you know, you want to know what you did and why this is going to be so interesting. But it is a balancing act with 500 words, and sometimes people are able to do it really nicely with half that space, and sometimes people seem to need twice that space. So.
I know as a reviewer, in addition to things being clear and what the contribution is being clear, as Juliet said, I also look for abstracts that are understandable in a self-contained way. Like I want all of the evidence, well, not all of the evidence, but I want sufficient evidence to support the claim that's being made in the abstract. I don't want it to be very obvious that the abstract has tried to fit the limit by, you know, hand waving at things they'll get to present in the talk or the poster, but not making that clear as to the reviewer.
yeah, I mean, and I guess along these lines, by kind of hand waving, so something I've seen a few times is just promising that there are results of experiments that can you know, support the claims being made. As a reviewer, I don't feel like that's enough information. You know, I kind of want to know a little bit more about what exactly the experiments look like and how they support the claims and so on and so forth. So this goes back to something we were talking about earlier, where having kind of information to show that you can support the claims you're making.
Right. So in addition to, I mean, for all of these points, really clarity and what is the question you're asking and why it's relevant, that also needs to fit in somewhere. So I think the background always is very short and every reviewer knows it, because you need to show you know where you're at, where and what your question is, then make clear your question, make clear where it fits, and show that you have enough work done for your abstract.
Maybe I can ask a sort of related question for myself. So I'm not someone who reviews abstracts at all, but I'm familiar with every abstract because I forward them all to the program committee, and I see every abstract that comes in. And so sometimes I'll see an abstract where the person has obviously gone to a lot of trouble to have some nice figures or graphs or charts. And sometimes that makes the abstract look, to me, you know, again, I'm not the person who reviews it, but it makes the abstract look to me really crowded. So you know, maybe the type is fairly small, the margins are fairly narrow, you know, within limits still, but the whole page looks a little bit crowded. So I guess my question is how. Okay, so I'm composing an abstract, and maybe I could put in graphs, I could put in charts, I could put in figures. How important is that compared to the rest of my abstract, to the sort of body of my abstract, if you know what I mean?
It depends, I think, on the type of abstract. If you do an experimental study and you get this really beautiful figure that proves that, you know, really provides strong evidence for your hypothesis, then it's probably really worth it. It also shows you've done the work. If you can show a figure with 30 participants or something, nobody's going to doubt if you have done the work. So that is, and if your figure is beautiful, it just, can go a long way. If it's a pretty picture showing your experimental design, it can be helpful if your design is complicated. But if it isn't, it's just a thing, what you didn't have enough results for your abstract. So I think it's the usefulness of the figure that matters in deciding that question. How much does it contribute? If it's a picture is worth 1,000 words, then yeah, that's a good figure.
Mhm.
Okay, do we have, sorry, go ahead, Julia.
On the point about figures making abstracts busy, and if that's a consideration that interests them, this probably differs by reviewer, but I don't mind that. I mean, I recognize that with 500-word abstracts, you to write something that's interpretable and detailed, you kind of have to stuff a lot of information in there. So as long as it's readable, I'm happy as a reviewer. I don't care.
The only reason why I didn't say it, because I think different people have different standards of readability, but that's exactly for me as well. If I can read it, it's fine. Yeah, and I'll put some effort to read it. So.
It should not require a magnifying glass to read.
No.
I mean, you can also think like, and so this is not so much about the formatting, though that's certainly important, but the more work the reviewer has to put in to understanding your abstract, the less positive it is for you, generally. Could be a rule of thumb to keep in mind.
Does anyone else from the audience have questions? I'm not seeing any more audience questions currently. Do the 5 of you on the panel have any other thoughts you'd like to impart to the attendees about getting an abstract ready for the meeting, things they might want to keep in mind, things that are important to you as reviewers?
No, I think the most important thing, I'll just say what I find the most important thing in an abstract, that the question is clearly stated, that the question is interesting, that it's clear why it's interesting from the abstract, that it's a clear abstract, and that there's enough results that I don't doubt if the work is done by the time of the LSA. So these are the most important things I want to see in an abstract. So I would advise everyone submitting to have these things in mind, proofread it carefully, and give somebody else to read it to get advice on the abstract. So those are my important things.
Yeah, I think I'd say that one of the things that I look at is, does it pass the so what test? Like, okay, yeah, how is this different from 50 other things, or why is this interesting compared to this? And also, I guess the other thing too is, what I call a rookie mistake, but you don't have to be a rookie to make it, is not having done the previous work, so that you don't say, no one's ever done this before, because I don't think that there's much that no one's ever thought about or hasn't done before, but not overselling it by saying, I'm the first person and the only person who's done this thing, right? That's already a turnoff, because it's like, okay, then you haven't read enough. So those are my 2.
Yeah, I think another thing that I would encourage you to do, especially if this is your first time submitting an abstract, that I think it's good advice for anyone really when you're preparing an abstract. First of all, look at the resources we have on the LSA website, which will give you some advice for how to write a compelling abstract. Look at the webinar that we did last year on how to convince in a page, and mainly don't write your abstract in isolation. It's already been said here by some of the panelists, confer with, show it to other people, get feedback on it. If you're a student, presumably you have an academic advisor, get some feedback from your advisor. Show it to your fellow students. Maybe you have a support group or a brown bag lunch. Do a sort of first run presentation there and get feedback from the people who are there. So it takes a village to prepare an abstract. Okay, it's a little bit early. It's about 2:25. I don't see any other questions from the audience. So if there are none, and if the panelists don't have anything further to add, which I'm guessing not.
No.
Okay, then I just want to thanks to all of our panelists for taking time out to be here and for sharing your expertise, and thanks to all of you who attended and took time out of your day to be with us. Again, we'll have a recording of the webinar up no later than Monday, and that will also include, if you forgot to download them today, it'll have the handouts, and I'll include the links that I sent around to everyone to the previous versions of the 5-Minute Linguist. So again, thanks everybody for joining us, and have a terrific weekend.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.